Welcome everybody to my new chess video in the Pirc Defence. I'm gonna show you my favorite opening against the Pirc Defence, and this is the super aggressive 150 attack. And in this video you will see my own recommendation how to play the 150 attack. Please lean back and enjoy. The Pirc defense arises after the following moves: pawn to e4, pawn to d6, pawn to d4, knight to f6 and knight to c3, defending the e4 pawn. By the way, I have to mention that here can exist the variation Berliner Mauer after pawn to e5, because now if we capture the e5, you're gonna recapture, queen captures, king takes, and then we have Berliner Mauer, which is a well-known system for black, and it's an equal position here. So I cannot recommend to capture the e5 pawn. So if pawn to e5 is coming, I can recommend the move knight to f3 and bishop to c4, because then we have a slight advantage and we have a comfortable position for white. Okay, but this only by the way. In general, he plays the Pirc defense with pawn to g6. And from here, there exists a lot of variations we can play. For example, a solid variation which starts with pawn to h3. He can play the classical variation with knight to f3. We can play bishop to d3. We can play the Austrian attack with pawn to f4. So you can see there are a lot of variations you can play. You can also play bishop to g5. But we're gonna play the 150 attack, which is one of the most aggressive lines against the Pirc defense. And this starts with bishop to e3. At first, we have to understand this position, what is going on. Especially, I want to tell you why I don't play pawn to f3 at first to prevent knight to g4. The reason is knight to g4 is a blunder, because after that we can simply play bishop to f4 or to g5, and then you can see maybe h6, bishop retreats to h4, then bishop g7, then h3, and the knight has to go back to the f6. And at the end of the day you can say it was only a waste of time for black. So this is an annoying move. The next thing you have to know that bishop to g7 is immediately a mistake and also a waste of time from black. I can show you why. Bishop to g7, then immediately queen to d2, and maybe c6, then we can play bishop to h6, and we can take the bishop, or he takes our bishop, but he has wasted one move. So it's very bad. In the next step, I want to show you what can happen if black decides to castle on the king side immediately, like in the King's Indian. Okay, maybe bishop g7, queen d2, castling and castling. And we have a very simple setup to gain to a dangerous attack. We just play f3, exchange the dark square bishop, and just run with the pawns. You can see this now. Just play a few moves, and here we stop. Actually, at this position there's no danger by our king, and we can simply push our pawns and crush black's king. So you can see why by far the best move and the theory move is pawn to c6, because black is flexible here. The king don't has to go to king side or queen side even yet. And also this move prepares pushing pawn to b5. So, okay, then we can play queen to d2, preparing for castle on the queen side. And again, here I have to say bishop to g7 is a waste of time because of bishop to h6. So the main move is pushing pawn to b5. And then we have pawn to f3, which is typical in the 150 attack. And after knight bd7, we reached a new main position where we have to know what kind of plan we have. The main move by far in this position is to push pawn to g4, but I personally don't like this move too much because black has a very solid continuation against it. He can close the position. And why I should attack on the king side when the king is on the middle of the board. So I think the sense of this move, I don't really understand this. Stockfish says also it's okay, but I don't like it really. So you can see why. I play the next best move for both sides. So knight from d7 to b6, this is the best square for the knight. If you want to play this as black, maybe. Then we have pawn to h4, and then we have the key move for black, why I don't like this line, pawn to h6, because after the best move, which is pawn to h5, then you can close the position with g5. And if you see the next few moves, I play only the best for both sides. You can see that position is not really easy to play as white, and both players have the same chances. So if we look at the position, this pawn is hanging, yeah, but this position is kind of equal, and I cannot see tricks for white. I cannot see the danger in this position, so I don't really know what white wants here. So that's the reason why I don't like pawn to g4. I don't like the main move in this position. I think the move pawn to d5 is more tricky than pawn to g4. And here you're gonna see why. Pawn to d5 makes a lot of sense in my opinion, and this has, I think, 3 reasons. The first reason is why we want to waste our time with a flank attack when black's king has not decided on which flank he wants to castle. So we don't know where black's king is gonna go in this game, so we waste our time maybe with pawn to g4. This is the first reason. The second reason is black's king is in the middle of the board and we have the space advantage. And why not challenging the center even yet? And the third reason is this is not a theory line, this is not the main move. So I think many of your opponents will not be prepared for this line. Let's have a look for the logical moves for black and also for the mistakes, what is not really good. Okay, the c6 pawn is attacked from black, so he has to do something against this. He can defend with the bishop, or he can even capture the pawn, or go for a counterattack with pawn to b4. Let's have a look at the very bad move which was played by Jan Timman, a strong grandmaster, bishop b7, but this loses the pawn immediately. After pawn captures, bishop captures, we have bishop takes, and knight takes, and white is on healthy pawn up, and don't be afraid for rook to b8, because you can simply defend with pawn to c4, and now the queen is protecting the b2 pawn, the knight can go back to c3, and this is much better for white. Let's go back into our main position. We saw that bishop b7 is a huge blunder, he loses the pawn immediately, but what will happen after a counterplay with pawn to b5? We can simply ignore the threat of pawn captures to a knight on c3. We can capture pawn on c6, and after pawn takes, we can capture the knight on d7 with check. And after bishop takes, queen takes, you can see that white is on healthy pawn up again. And it's so hard to play against this pawn majority on the queen side. At least we have a look at a full game after c captures on d5, which is the best continuation for black. Please watch the game and enjoy.